Well, hi, everyone. This is Daniel Williams, Senior Editor at MGMA and host of the MGMA Podcast Network. We are joined today by Celeste Headlee. You may know her name if you have seen her. She is a media figure, a journalist, professional speaker. You may have seen her on NPR. You may have seen her on a TED Talk or read one of her books. And that is how I got to know Celeste, through her book, Do Nothing: How to Break Away from Overworking, Overdoing, and Underliving. We actually had this book on our MGMA book club, and it resonated with us. And I think it'll resonate with many of you who are in the medical field and healthcare because of burnout, because of stress. So without further ado, let's welcome Celeste into the podcast. Celeste, thanks for joining us.
And thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So I just want to talk a little bit about your background first. I kind of set the stage a little bit, but what else would you like our listeners to know about you, about your background, whether it's in journalism or anything else that you might want to share, just so we get an idea of who you are?
Well, I mean, the one thing I will say is that I think burnout is is as common in journalism as it probably is in the medical field. We're dealing with two fields that are constantly on deadline, right? Are pretty much always on, that even when you're not on, you feel a need to do more reading and check in constantly. And the stakes feel very high. They're different stakes.
Right.
But these are some of the drivers of burnout. And it's really common that people who are mission driven are more likely to suffer from burnout because they feel as though they're making the world a better place. It's harder to get them to disengage from their work. And so often when someone's mission driven, it's part of their identity. So I've been in journalism and in public media, nonprofit media, for my whole career, over 25 years. And so the only thing I would like to say about my background is that I wrote this book. I actually didn't start to write a book. I started doing research to help myself.
Okay.
Just to fix my problem. So That's where this all comes from.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that we've seen the studies that burnout, stress, the age of anxiety, all these different aspects of human life right now are real. They're tangible. They're not set in one field or another. I'm glad that you opened the door for journalists, because prior to MGMA, that's what I did. I was a deadline reporter, and I burned out twice in that world because there was always the story that you were working on, turned it in, and then there was the next story. And then there was the next story. And being on daily deadlines, weekly deadlines, monthly deadlines, it didn't matter. They're deadlines, and they're very, very stressful. And I love that you sought out initially research to just help you deal with it. If you don't mind me asking, what were you feeling? Were you feeling stress, anxiety, overwhelm? What was going on where you began to research? Maybe it was stress management or whatever it was in the first place that could give you tools to handle things better.
I wish I could say that it was I was definitely overwhelmed. I was definitely stressed. I wish I could say those were what sent me to get help, because they should have been.
Yeah.
Sadly, that's so common in our lives. Yeah. What ended up driving me to start to do this research is because I started getting sick. Okay. And I am a really healthy person. Like when I was in school, I would always get those perfect attendance awards and things. Like, I'm very, very healthy. But I started getting regularly, every 2 to 3 months, I would get sick enough where I'd have to miss work. And that was so odd to me. And the other thing I noticed is that I was really irritable. Okay. Small things, my resilience just dropped. Small things that people did wrong sent me over, were just enough to tip me over. And I was angry. I was not a nice person to be around. I just wasn't myself.
I got you.
And so I started trying to figure out what was going on. And we're talking about like 2015, 2016. So it predated a lot of the more, it predated the WHO's classification as of burnout as an actual clinical diagnosis of a syndrome. It predated a lot of the more societal discussion of burnout. And so when I started to do my research, I had to really dig to try to figure out what was going on. And what I really wanted to find out was what the cause was, which was very difficult.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. So I want to talk to you about the book. One of our book club members suggested it. I admit I had not heard of it yet, even though I have also read a lot of books on managing stress, managing anxiety, other aspects there. But this was a new book to me. Not to flatter you here, but we loved it because it was wonderfully written, had great stories, anecdotes, but was also, because we're in the medical field here, we like things to be backed up by research. We like things not just to be opinion driven, like, hey, I'm feeling kind of bad, so I'm going to write a book. But you were feeling bad. You went out and did the research. Let's talk about the book first then. What surprised you about some of the research that you found? Was there any, I guess I should say, was there anything that opened your eyes up to overwork, overburden, overwhelm there?
I mean, I got to tell you, Daniel, the process of researching for that book was just a series of epiphanies. Just like I could feel those little pops in my brain. Yeah. You know, I went in, I honestly expected it to find out that I was addicted to my technology, right? Okay. And that I was overworked, that I was working too many hours, and I was addicted to my tech. And, you know, I tried being a Luddite for a while. I literally gave up almost all of my tech for like 6 weeks. Wow. I got a dumb phone. I got rid of my tablet. Stopped using my laptop, etc. Like I used my computer at work because I had to. But other than that, I gave it up. And it helped, but it wasn't it was basically treating a symptom. It wasn't actually solving the core problem. So like for me, the process of researching this was a process of peeling back layer after layer, trying to get the root of it. So when you talk about surprises, they were constant. You know, I have always thought that work was an essential need for Homo sapiens, that we need to work in order to be fulfilled, in order to experience well-being. The fact that that's not true was a big surprise to me. There were so many surprises over the course of this research. You know, like I said, I got super excited. I would be constantly boring all of my friends by going, oh my God, you wouldn't believe these research I found today. And it's a meta-analysis, the gold standard. You know, I got really excited all the time about all the things that I was finding.
Yeah. I want to go back to your moment of truth where you stepped away from tech to a degree as much as you could. I don't want to assume anything. So tell me, because your career is dependent upon you knowing what's going on as a reporter, as an investigative reporter, as someone who is sharing with the public what's going on. Were you able, when you did, I guess, log on when you were physically at the office, to be able to catch up? Or were you having fear of missing out when you were detached from it? What was going on in your brain and everything else where you were just maybe staring at the clouds, going on a nature walk, doing things that weren't associated with, what did they just say on Twitter? What did they just say here? What happened here? You know, how did you balance that in your mind?
Yeah, it was difficult. I mean, everything that if I read an article online, I read it in Reading View, which, you know, makes it very plain. Again, I had to use the computer at work. That's how people do email and communications, those things. Right. But you know that feeling when you walk out of your house and you suddenly realize you've left your phone, you don't have your phone on you, and then you just have this sudden grip of panic in your heart. You're like, that lasted for a couple weeks. Okay. that feeling of panic, right. That I was missing out. And I understood that was emotional. You know, my logical brain knew that, you know, I know the statistics, you know, the vast majority of our email is not at all urgent, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I put a note on my email account saying, I'm not answering email, call me. And I was taking phone calls all the time. Actually, I barely heard from people because when you make them call you, they don't. So I got to say that fear of missing out, it probably lasted a couple weeks, and then I started to just sort of loosen up. You know, I relaxed. You know, we really haven't had smartphones for all that long. When did the
I
Apple?
know.
It came out in like 2007.
I know.
So it actually didn't take that long for me to recover, to detox from that. And I also describe in the book the train trip I took all around the country, which was a similar process. And I found that for the first few days, I had those anxious feelings of wanting to know what's going on, and then it let go.
Yeah, I'll share something with you. I think I shared this in another podcast, but a few weeks ago, my family and I took a family vacation. We went to Costa Rica. We were in a very secluded area. We could get internet access. I used my phone it wasn't connected to the internet. I had some books saved on there that I could read or listen to. And I'll tell you, it took me 24 to 36 hours to relax because I was flooded with thought, because I wasn't staring at something every time I had that urge or anything else. I'll just go back to my best friend, my phone, my device, whatever it is, because it's got everything I need there. And if anything is under the surface that might be troubling me or thoughts of any kind coming in, I'll just distract myself with this device. And what I saw was once I detached from that, then everything flooded in. It's all stuff that's always there. I mean, it's not like, oh no, we're going to invade you while you're in Costa Rica. They're here in Denver too. They're just, I distract myself to such a degree that I never get there. What can you tell us about that? What is going on in the brain? Anything you want to share with that on your research or your own personal experiences? What did you find there?
I mean, think about it. We just haven't, there's nothing particularly wrong with our tech. I say that knowing full well that a lot of the software, the apps have been designed to literally make us addicted, right? To make us all dopamine fiends. Yeah. But in general, there's nothing wrong with technology. It's a tool like anything else, and human beings are designed to use tools. I think one of the earliest, Homo sapiens we found literally had a tool next to them. And we know neurologically that we're so adapted to tools that when you pick up a hammer, your brain treats that hammer like it's an extension of your arm.
Right.
But we put the hammer down when we finish our task.
Right.
That's what we've evolved to do.
Yeah.
Evolution doesn't work fast enough for us to deal with having a tool in our hands that's there all the time. And people admit to taking the phones with them into the bathroom. They sit right next to us while we're sleeping and distract your brain. I mean, look, this is not about shaming anyone. These are neurological facts. Our brain behaves differently in the presence of the phone. And we just don't evolve fast enough to handle healthily the changes that have happened so rapidly. So, this whole book is just an argument for us to understand how Homo sapiens behaves and to tend to us in a healthy way. I think at one point, one of the things I say is like, imagine you're a zookeeper and you get your brand new Homo sapiens animal, right? And you have to think about what's the best care for this animal, right? Mm-hmm. You definitely are not going to leave them connected to a tablet all the time. And any parent knows how guilty you feel when your kid is bothering you and you stick them in front of the TV or in front of a computer. Right. So, that this anxiety we feel that the tech causes us, again, this isn't about the tech is so evil. Mm-hmm. Of course it does that. Of course it diminishes your well-being. Of course it does.
Right. So you talked about the tech itself is not the problem, and I would totally agree with that. I mean, my gosh, your work as a reporter, the work that we do at MGMA, we provide content and information for our audience. It's so helpful. I have to take a deep breath. We just stop for a minute. We go, okay, let's just slow down here. So what is going on then behaviorally? Because this is these are medical practice leaders who are listening here. They think of things in data in science, in ways that we can understand that. So what is happening here where you were talking about its addictive behavior? Do you have anything that you want to share with us from the science perspective of it that's going on? That we're not able to we're able to set the hammer down, but not the phone.
Right. I mean, that's number one. We keep it with us all the time. You know, the other thing is that we really don't have any evidence that the brain can distinguish between paging through Facebook and actual work.
Okay.
Right. So a lot of people will take a break from work and the first thing they do is pull out their phones. But as far as we know, the brain thinks you're still working, meaning that you're basically working the entire time that you're conscious. And because the presence of your phone distracts your brain while you're sleeping, if your phone is right next to you, part of your brain expends energy preparing for a notification or call or text to come in at all times.
Right.
So you are on 24 hours a day. So of course, you know, one of the things, the pandemic was tragic and awful, but a few silver linings came out of that. And one of them was the research that we got into the way the brain and body behave using video conferencing, you know, so that Zoom fatigue that people began to feel, that was backed up by reams of research into the behavior of the brain while using video conferencing, for example. Video conferencing is this incredible tool and it's great, but we also know it needs to be limited because it is uniquely fatiguing to the brain. The cost versus benefit calculation is much higher on cost than it is on benefit, as opposed to the telephone, which is pretty much almost all benefit. I mean, in person is very beneficial for you, but the next best thing is a phone call. So there's all these things that we now know about technology and the way it interacts with both our neurology and our physiology and our emotional well-being to know that you don't have to stop using tech. You just have to be intentional. You can't default to it. The last thing I'll say about this is the one thing Homo sapiens does better than any other species. And you and I both know it's not logical thinking, right?
Right.
The way we tried to believe for a very long time. It is communication and collaboration. Okay. We do that better than any other species, and we do it at such a high level that if you look into the research on the phenomenon of neural coupling, you know that when a pair of ears are taking in through the sound of a human voice their story, and they start to listen and click in, their brain waves begin to move in exact sync. In some cases, the sync is so close that the brain waves of the listener anticipates changes in the speaker's brain by a fraction of a second. Okay. That's what we're trying to replace with emojis. It cannot be done. And I asked one scientist if at some point written communication of any kind could equal verbal communication in terms of effectiveness. And she said it's possible in 5,000 to 10,000 years. So the fact that we keep coming up with new ways to replace the voice and the ears, or American Sign Language, whatever, complex language you use to communicate, is insane to me. It's just absolutely insane. It's like saying, well, let's not have Whitney Houston sing. Let's have her do plumbing. Let's take the one thing you do better than anything else in the world and choose not to.
Right.
It's just we're not only using tech in a gorging way, the same way that you have a bag of Doritos next to you and just keep eating and keep eating.
Right.
But we're also using it for the wrong things. There's some things tech is better at than we are. Let's use it for that. But when we're better at tech, then we need to keep that to ourselves.
You've shared so much, and I want to go back to one thing you said where you just went cold turkey with it. And there is something to this. I'm not saying technology is a drug, but it's doing some of the same things in our brain, perhaps, the craving of it. You just went cold turkey. So you went as you use the term, the Luddite route. There is the middle way. So what is the middle way with technology? What do we do where we don't go, I'm depriving myself of all pleasure and all things that I enjoy and all these things? Or like, well, I get a benefit out of this. Okay, I worked really hard today at my job, whatever my job is. I want to go check in with my network on Instagram, Facebook, whatever the social media platform is, whatever that might be for any of our listeners. Do you do a time limit? What do you do where it's usable and practical and you still get enjoyment out of it, but you don't look up 6 hours later and go, wow, I'm feeling kind of crummy now, and now my day is gone, and what do I do now?
I mean, the main thing is that you have to find something that works for yourself. It's kind of like the way a personal trainer is going to tell you, look, I don't care if you spend 10 minutes, just do something, make it fit into your life. And it's the same thing here, that there are all kinds of options for you. I could tell you all the things that I do, like at 9 p.m., my phone goes dark, right? Emergency calls can come in, but it goes dark. I have a time. The only social media app that I have on my phone is Instagram, because you have to take pictures, so I have to have it on there. And my pictures are mostly of the woods and my dog. So that has a timer on it to make sure that I don't get caught up in that scrolling behavior.
Right.
When I am on vacation, I put a message on my email that's an out of office message that says, if you send me an email, it'll be deleted. So don't bother. Call me if it's urgent. Otherwise, I'll see you on whatever date I'm coming back. Okay. On Saturdays and Sundays, I do not look at social media or my email inbox at all.
Right.
I also choose an opening and closing time. Like for the store of Daniel, when do you open and when do you close? And do you close for lunch? Because if you're at a store and you close at 6 and someone shows up at 9 p.m., you don't say, okay, just for this one person, I'm going to open up, which is really what we're doing when we decide to just real quick check Slack or check our email. That's what you're doing. You're opening the store up again.
Okay.
But I want people to choose their opening and closing times and make them meaningful. Make them mean something. That doesn't mean you can't ever break the rules. It means it has to be for a good reason.
Right.
But again, all of these things, they have to work for you. So I would, all I did was just keep trying different things.
Okay.
And until I found the ones that I would stick with. And that actually brought me some relief.
Yeah. So we have focused mostly on the technology aspect, but this isn't a book about technology. It's in the title, Do Nothing, How to Break Away from Overworking, Overdoing, and Underliving. So it's finding that balance in life. It's finding space to become you again, whoever the person is that's underneath all the things. But it's also what I found, and I've seen it in studies as well, that during the pandemic, we were unable to step away from the work, so to speak, if that makes sense. Like we were tied to the job, and if we were working from home, when are you ever able to get away from the work itself? And so
you can't. Yeah.
No. And so give us the tool there. What did you find in your research, in your book, that would help our listeners be able to go, I've been on call, I've done the job for today, I'm closing the book, I'm walking away. Just like you said, you use the analogy, if you're a shop owner and it's 6 p.m. and somebody shows up at 9, you don't suddenly go, opening back up, here I go.
Exactly.
I'm going to go get the keys out and sell you pet food or whatever it might be, whatever that shop is. We live in, for a lot of our listeners, that is an administrative type job or some type of job where we could just turn on our computer and get right back to work, even if it's midnight. You and I have probably either both sent or received emails that we maybe look at the time and it's 3 a.m. and you're going, what the heck? Please don't send me emails at 3 a.m. I want you to go to sleep, do whatever you do, but please don't be working. I have people to report to me that will do that, and I don't want that. I hope they're not working at 3. So how do we step away from it? How do we close the door and just become ourselves again?
I think one of the most powerful things for me was realizing why we feel the compulsion. And, I read a dizzying number of the most boring books you could imagine on, labor practices and traditions and all these labor hours and statistics going back to the times of the Greeks and the Romans. And only to discover that this compulsion to keep working at all times is pretty recent in our history. That was you talk about surprises, it was a major eye-opener to me because, you think about a serf in the Middle Ages and you think literally everything about their life was worse. But it turns out they worked maybe half the year. Mm-hmm. And that holds steady in all cultures for which we have records for it. And in fact, even modern hunters and gatherers worked maybe a couple days out of the week. Mm-hmm. They found enough food to last them and they stopped working. And for me, understanding that this, I can't get away from compulsion, this drive to be productive all the time, it's a product of many different things, including brainwashing, but it's not natural. A lot of people say, oh no, I just really love to work. Unlikely. That's unlikely. I get that you feel that, but I could explain to you in great detail. I spent an entire book explaining to you why you feel that way. When in fact, human beings don't persist. We pulse. Mm-hmm. And our rhythm for most of our history on this earth has been a big outlay of energy, planting the fields, and then you rest. Mm-hmm. Doing a harvest and then having a 2-week harvest festival. They didn't celebrate weddings for an afternoon on a Saturday. They celebrated weddings for like 7 to 10 days. Like it was a whole thing. Yeah. That's the way humans have been for the vast majority of our history. Like this addiction to productivity is a blip on the evolutionary timescale for Homo sapiens. So for me, that was really freeing because to my mind, if those changes have been that recent, it means they can be undone. Mm-hmm. For myself personally, and if we can get enough people on board for all of us en masse. I say this because the strong drive that people have to just really quick change, check their emails, or they had a thought, I need to write it down and send that out on Slack or whatever it may be. Right. That drive is so deeply implanted in our psyches. It's part of our most deeply held values. Mm-hmm. And it is so hard to change anybody's deeply held values. That is one of the most difficult things to do in life. And that's why I ended up having to do so much history in this book, was to like help people understand why they feel that drive. Yeah. And I want to be respectful of your time here. So I just want to ask you one more question here then. You're really getting at the heart of some of the aspects, and some of it is here inherent in U.S. productivity, because some of our European countries, they take a heck of a lot more vacation. They're more relaxed on that. And what is going on here where, let's talk about it in some different ways. One is compulsion, where you want to keep going. But to me, one of the other ones could be guilt. Like, well, if I turn my productivity down 10%, I have a performance review and they're going to measure it and they're going to go, well, what happened here in 2024? You were cooking in 2023, and I'm just using this metaphorically. I'm speaking for a friend, of course, but but I'm going, well, but there was burnout involved, or I was missing out on the kids' activities at school, and I want to have the freedom to be able to do these things, but what if the job, the workplace is not as accommodating? And so they're going, well, we're seeing a lack of productivity. You know what I'm saying? There are a lot of different factors involved here. So it could be your own personal guilt or drive or compulsion. There could be the culture of an organization. There could be other external factors. And so I know it's a lot to throw up in the air here, but it's like, how do you deal with all this and get to the heart of it where you can have really good work-life balance? You can be very productive, but not overburdened, So there is a lot in what you've asked, and I'm going to try to knock down these pins one by one. So first of all, this idea that you are in competition with your colleagues, or that you are constantly having to prove your worth to a company has literally been implanted in our unconscious mind. And I say that because we have the evidence, we have the business records, we have records from Edward Bernays, who was the great propaganda expert who taught corporate leaders how to, there's no other way to say it, how to brainwash their workers into believing that if they weren't on the ball all the time, they could lose their job. And that hard work, long hours were associated with patriotism, with being a functioning member of the country. The guilt comes from the fact that we are, especially in countries that were colonized by Britain, that means some of the worst offenders are the US, the UK, Australia, Canada, etc. There is this strong undercurrent of Protestant work ethic. Doesn't matter what your faith is now, even if you're an atheist. Those values have also been implanted in us to make us believe that those who are working the hardest are also the most deserving, and that if you're not working, the more you work, the more you deserve. The more you work, the more value you are as a person. I do want to de-link this idea of productivity to the hours you work, though, because there's no connection. And in fact, in many cases, an inverse ratio, because we have literally stacks of research proving that those who work excessive hours, and the WHO defines that as 55 hours a week or more, are the least productive in any cohort. They have followed scientists, they've followed doctors. You've read the book, so you have seen some of the case studies of even hospitals, that the longer hours that you work, the fewer even operations you can get done. They followed that orthopedic unit in Europe for a very long time, expecting to have to hire more workers because they were reducing the shift lengths of the people on staff, only to find out that they didn't need to hire anybody. And they worked through their entire backup of people on the waiting list for surgery because they became that much more productive. You are more productive when you're healthy. And the last thing I will say is that productivity is not a goal. We tend to think that efficiency and productivity should be goals. They're value neutral. Efficiency, what's more efficient than cancer? Right? Efficiency is not a goal. It's just a way to do something. Sometimes a less efficient method of doing something is a superior way of doing it. And the same is true for productivity. Productivity is only good depending on what you're producing. And so, this idea that we constantly have to produce no matter what it is that we're doing, and knowing that when you're working excessive hours, your product is shoddy, that needs to go away. The last thing I will say is that, look, we have the data. The WHO did a massive study, global study of well-being, health, physical health, emotional health, etc., and excessive hours, only to find that working more than 55 hours a week causes early death. Not as correlated with, not as linked with, causes it. And their data show that if you are working excessive hours between the ages of like 25 and 45, you're going to reap those costs later on. It's going to shorten your life.
Wow, that is powerful. Well, Celeste Headlee, I want to thank you for joining us so much on the MGMA podcast.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thanks so much for letting me talk about all this.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And so everybody, I will provide direct links to Celeste's book, Do Nothing, and also to her website so you can get more resources from her. And I just want to thank all of you for the work that you're doing out there, but take care of yourself. And thank you so much for being podcast listeners.